Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Beyond Trauma. It should be February-ish when this releases. I hope you're still in the New Year vibes. Right now, as I'm recording, it's about a third of the way into January, and I know a lot of my clients have lost their New Year vibes already. So I hope that's not you. If it is you, reach out. Don't go months and months. I'm here for coaching. I have free resources on my site. There's a lot of places you can go to get reinvigorated and make that active decision to keep on keeping on with your goals, with your mental health, and so forth. I've been doing a lot of deep diving lately, and I think I'll be sharing about that in a future episode. Also, a lot of streamlining, a lot of thinking about what's important, focusing. Um, so you might see some of that reflected in the podcast, and changes in the podcast. Let's see. I consider this podcast really a body of work that I've been putting together to tell a story. And there's been an element to this story that I've really needed to include for a long time, and have been trying to find the right person and way to do it. And that's the element of nutritional health, micronutrients, vitamins for mental health and well-being. And I am so proud and excited to bring you this guest, Bonnie J. Kaplan. Um, she was raised and educated in the US and moved to Calgary to work at the Alberta Children's Hospital Research Center and then the University of Calgary, and has spent more than half her life as a Canadian. She has formal training and degrees, master's, PhD, and postdoc from University of Chicago, Brandeis, um, in the West Haven, Connecticut VA Hospital Neuropsychology Laboratory, and Yale University Department of Neurology. She's a researcher, and that was important to me, right? If I was going to bring you evidence-based information about micronutrients. Um, when Bonnie is asked how she became interested in nutrition and mental health, she explains that her training in psychology and neuroscience led her to focus on the biological basis of human behavior. For many years, she studied the role of nutrition in mental illness and brain development. Three awards she feels very honored by: selection in 2017 as one of 150 Canadian difference makers in mental health in honor of Canada's 150th birthday. In 2019, she was awarded the Dr. Rogers Prize for Excellence in complementary and alternative medicine because of her research on nutrition and mental disorders. And in 2021, she was chosen as the top 7 over 70 in Calgary. As Bonnie approached retirement, she decided to focus on two tasks. One was knowledge translation, educating the general public about the role of diet in creating vulnerability to mental health problems. From that goal, her book, The Better Brain, emerged, written for general public with Professor Julia Ruckledge, published in 2021 by HarperCollins. I read the book and I learned so much, guys. It's mind-blowing what we can do with food, and what having the wrong or not enough of the right foods can do to us. And that's what we're going to talk about. Her second goal was to raise funds to support her junior colleagues who were leaving the field because of their inability to convince government funding agencies that scientific research on nutrition and mental health was worthwhile. She established two charitable funds, one in Canada, managed by the Calgary Foundation, one in the US, managed by FJC Foundation in New York City. So far, the two funds have attracted over $1 million. All of it has been distributed mostly to support clinical trials and biomarker research. I tell you, this is very important. Scientists in Canada, US, and New Zealand have been recipients of those funds, and now additional money is being sought for further assays of epigenetic, microbiome, and metabolomic indicators of benefit of micronutrient treatment. So, all that to say, this is serious research. And when you hear the stories and the research that Bonnie has seen and been a part of, you will be just blown away. And I think you'll be convinced to look at your diet and look at your supplementation. Bonnie's website is bonniejkaplan.com. You can get her book, The Better Brain Book, at thebetterbrainbook.com. I'll note that we got cut off at the end of our recording. We lost um, our service, but really, I was just going to ask her to tell people where they can find her. And I'll put that again at the end. I'll be solo. And she really sums it up with there's no magic bullet. We need many, many, many nutrients and vitamins for our brains and bodies to run efficiently, which she'll explain why. So I asked her offline about some supplements that I take. And she said the same thing. She says on here, where's the research? And, why won't these companies let us research their supplements? They should stand behind it with research. But what you want to look for, like she says at the end of the episode, is a lot of nutrients, micronutrients, and vitamins. So I'll let her explain it. She does it much better than I. We really get into some facts here. She's very honest about what has been researched, what hasn't. So I feel like that's a really trusting person. An experimenter when they'll say that. I'll also just let you know, coming up, 3.5 Acres Yoga is training yoga teachers to be more trauma sensitive. That training is coming up this March. Take a look at 3.5acres.org for more information on that training. We have sliding scale, we have barter options, and we are doing beautiful work with that nonprofit for the last decade to bring trauma sensitive yoga to survivors of trauma. We are also always looking for new board members and team members. So if you think that is a board that you'd want to be a part of, you can reach out and let me know. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Write a few lines, particularly on iTunes, the Beyond Trauma podcast. Your support makes a big, big difference in keeping this podcast going. Here we go. There we go. Bonnie, firstly, I have to say thank you very, very much. I know you're very busy, and thank you for making time for this. This is an area that I've wanted to delve into for a very long time.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. I forgot to ask you how you happened upon my book, or did someone recommend it to you? Because I'm delighted to hear about people living so far away from me who find it.
I wanted to do a show on the topic of nutrition and mental health, gut health and mental health. I've long felt that there is a connection there. So I used my researching skills to find people that were qualified to talk about that. And then I listened to your book on audio, and there's so much in there. And I said, we have to bring this to listeners because I can't have a podcast on mental health. We talk a lot on this podcast about the body, ways we can move to improve our mental health. We talk about nature, we talk about meditation, and this is really the missing link. I consider this podcast a body of work, a real body of work that looks at well-being from a lot of different angles. We always like to be research-based. I'm really careful about that, so bringing on really qualified folks. And this is a missing link, a very, very important missing link.
Well, I really appreciate your describing it that way. Pardon me, Lara. I often force myself to remember to say, look, everything else you know is important. Yoga, breathing, exercise, family support, all of these things are very important. But we're not talking about what you're calling the missing link. I call the foundation.
Yeah.
Because if your brain cells are starving, and there's very good reason to believe that most of us have really starving brains, then, you know, breathing and exercise is not going to have as big an impact as you want it to have. So, missing link, missing foundation, whatever, nutrition, we need to pay more attention to nutrition.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
Mhm.
And maybe that's a big problem, that this is often put to the side or the last thing or seen as an extra, and not given the weight, the foundation, the centrality especially in our mental health dialogue, that it should be. Of course, we hear about nutrition, but it's usually about losing weight or bulking up or, very physical outer the outer benefits of eating certain ways, but it's not as spoken about in the mental health space. And I know when, I eat certain ways, I feel differently. So I can,
Mhm.
it's an N of one, but and I can expound upon that to think, well, there must be more details to this.
I love talking to people who can actually feel the difference because it's just maybe a little bit of self disclosure here. I can't. I mean, I study this. I believe my own data. I believe everybody else's data. But honestly, I think I could eat junk for a year and my mental health wouldn't be any different. I might get constipated and fat, but I just don't. You
Mm,
people who really notice that you are thinking more clearly and you feel better, that wow, you're lucky that you have that kind of biomarker.
mm. Yeah, I definitely notice it, in relation to sugar. That's
Mhm.
probably the quickest, easiest in for me. And when I sort of watch my sugar levels, I just feel mentally more like grounded. And I guess that's
Mhm.
another thing too. I can definitely feel certain foods make me feel more grounded. I feel more focused when I'm eating a certain way. Um, so I see a very strong connection.
Good, good.
What does the science have to say?
Um,
Give us some of the science between like what we're eating and how we might be feeling.
so it is overwhelmingly supportive of what you're experiencing, Lara. There are, when I give talks, I always say, look, there are about 100 studies that I can cite, and they fall into four groups. So I'm going to skip some. First of all, I can't do 100 studies in one talk. I
No?
couldn't do it. But also, I'm going to skip the ones which are not proof. They're correlational. Epidemiology has an important purpose. It shows a relationship, showing that, for example, to be silly, men on average are taller than women. So that's a clue. We should look at the reasons why, but that doesn't prove anything about it in particular. And some men are shorter than some women, etc. Same thing is true in nutrition. There are over a dozen large epidemiological studies. By large, I mean tens of thousands of people in so many different countries around the world, not just in Canada. By the way, not many from the US, but from the Northern European countries, from the Asian countries, all over, asking the question whether there's a relationship between how we eat and how we feel. And they all find the same thing. People who are eating mostly a highly processed diet have more evidence of depression and anxiety than those who are eating a more what we think of as healthy, whole foods, Mediterranean style diet. Universally across all cultures, across all ages, the study in the youngest children was down to age, I think, 9, 10, 11. That's a Canadian study. And it asked things like, how are you feeling in terms of worries today, and how are you
Mm,
feeling in terms of they use simple childhood language. And I mean, you looked at the results and you thought, what are we doing to our children? The kids who are eating the most processed foods have many more symptoms of being worried and depressed, etc., than the kids who are eating a more whole foods diet. So we know it's across ages, across cultures. It's a correlation, but it doesn't prove causation. So the rest of the research is more focused on causation. As somebody in one of my audiences once, when I was presenting the correlational data, raised her hand and she said, but maybe the people who are depressed are not eating broccoli because when we're depressed, we don't want broccoli. We're looking for comfort food. So that's why you need to have more than correlational data, right? And
yes.
now we do.
And now we do.
Yeah.
And so is it more of the things that are in the processed foods that are impacting our mental health, or is it the things that are not in the processed foods?
That is, you have no idea what a great question that is, I'll bet. But it's something that we have wondered about. We researchers of nutrition in mental health have wondered about for a long time. And an important study came out last year that really discussed that at length. And they showed why in their, I can't remember the numbers right now, so it's not important. I can make the point without it. But in their group, they were quite certain there was better evidence that that the food, the ultra processed, I call it chemical rubbish. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We used to call it junk food. For some reason, that's gone out of favor. Um, and so the people who are eating more of that were getting more of the chemicals and toxins, obviously. But that probably didn't explain their finding. They thought it was more likely that those packages of chemicals were replacing the nutrients that their brains need. So it's more likely that this was evidence of a hungry brain, not getting
Hmm.
the nutrients it needed for
Yeah.
adequate mental health.
Because you could feel that when you're eating. Again, if you do feel that, I know I feel that if I eat something processed, I still have that feeling of not having been fed
Oh, I wonder,
after.
yeah, I wonder if other people, I haven't heard that before.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, okay, but that'll keep you on the straight and narrow, won't it?
It does. No, it does. Actually tuning into that feeling and recognizing. I mean,
Yes.
we eat very healthy in my home. And but I have my snack days and my treats here and there, or I don't know if it's a treat. But I'm not always perfect in my eating, and but I used that feeling to get better at eating. So just noticing how does this make me feel? Like, really? Like, yeah, it was enjoyable in the moment, or was it? So the mindfulness, um, that you and I were talking about a bit in the beginning, that I told you is part of the podcast and part of my practice, I use that to help me tune in and make better choices. So yeah, so I use that trick to help me stay on the straight and narrow. um, so for those who are eating a lot of processed foods, and not getting those nutrients, so there's a deficiency, the brain is hungry, as you say. And one of the things in your book that there's so much in there, but I'll tell you, this fact really stood out, and I don't remember the numbers, but you describe very clearly that the brain, like by size compared to other organs, takes, I think it's like a quarter more, or I'm probably saying it
Mhm.
wrong, of blood
Yeah.
that's going through the brain. And so the nutrients are in the blood, and the blood is super important to the brain functioning. Am I sort of
Oh,
getting that
you've
right?
got it. Oh, you've got it. Thank you, Lara. It's a really important point. So why don't we just talk about this for a minute for your audience? So the way we get nutrients, I mean, we're many of us don't think about that.
No.
Um, we we get them if plants have good soil so that they can absorb about 15 minerals, and they then absorb the minerals, and they do all kinds of amazing things that humans can't do, like photosynthesis, and they manufacture approximately 15 vitamins using those approximately 15 minerals. And so then a healthy plant grown in healthy soil will have about 30 of those. We're going to call them micronutrients, minerals and vitamins together. Then we come along and we eat the crop grown from those plants, or we eat the animals that ate the crop from those plants, and we should get a broad spectrum of about 30 micronutrients. It doesn't even attend to things like the omega 3 fatty acids we get from fish. Now, where do those go? They go into our stomach and our digestive system, our gut overall. And if our gut is healthy, they are absorbed into the bloodstream, and we can talk about the gut later, but they're absorbed into the bloodstream, and the bloodstream goes all over the brain and body. But the brain is special. Like when I grew up, I was taught, oh, you have to eat right so that you'll have strong muscles and bones. I have nothing against strong muscles and bones, but Why wasn't I taught that I was primarily eating to feed my brain, which is the truth? I don't
Yeah.
know. And I don't think our kids are taught that today, and they should be. So why is that the case? Well, the human brain is very small. You could hold one in your hands. It's only about 2.5 pounds. So let's say you weigh 150 pounds. 2.5 pounds is a very small proportion. And yet we know from basic physiology, and this is a universally accepted fact that I'm giving you. It's not experimental or anything. It's known that the brain absorbs at least 20 to 40% of all the nutrients and the oxygen, etc., that we can provide it. In fact, about a quarter or maybe a fifth of our blood supply is perfusing our brain at any given minute. In this little tiny little 2.2, 2 point, let's say 2.5 pound brain. So if you're sitting there very quietly, let's say you're doing yoga or meditation, your brain is still needing 20 to 40%. And the range is because it's a little hard to measure. But anyway, 20 to 40% of the nutrients that you have consumed. But if you're actively paying attention, like you are to me right now, Lara,
Yeah.
it's more than 50% in that tiny little brain. The
Mhm.
second most metabolically active organ in our entire body is our heart, but the brain is disproportionately pulling in those micronutrients. So
And
we
it's
have to
another
do
thing
that.
that I've definitely felt, and probably some
Mhm.
people can relate, is when you're concentrating more deeply or you're trying to think clearly, you can really feel that you're hungrier.
Yes. When I first became aware of that was maybe about 20 years ago. I was giving a talk to a large group of people who are all special education specialists in our public school system here in Calgary, Alberta. And I wasn't even focusing so much on that topic, but I threw out a few figures about brain metabolism. And somebody raised their hand and said, is that why on, I think it was Wednesday afternoon, when everybody in the public school system, all of our special ed people they're not out in the schools testing kids, they're back in their office concentrating on getting all their reports done, and they're working really hard mentally. Everybody always says they eat more, they're hungry.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, it's probably right.
Now you describe it very well and detailed in the book. Maybe you can give us a little like cliff notes of what is going on the brain with some of those synapses, or maybe that's not even the right terms, that
Yeah.
it's so important to have so many vitamins
Yeah.
and nutrients to make those different connections happen smoothly and effectively for us to think well and feel well.
Yes, I appreciate that question too. I'll give you not the Cliff Notes version, but the version that I'm trying, which is a Cliff Notes version, the version that I'm trying to get all mental health clinics to teach their clients when they are first referred.
Yeah.
Because this is what will make the difference. This is the aha moment. And this is what will make the difference between people saying, oh, I should eat better, and actually trying to eat better because they know that their brains need it. And it all begins with one word, which is not taught out of biochemistry classes, and that is cofactor. Micronutrients are the cofactors of our metabolism. Oh, I guess there are two words there. Some people might not know what metabolism is. So here's the Cliff Notes version of metabolism. Everywhere in our brains and our bodies, at all times of the day and night, there are metabolic steps happening in which chemical A has to be converted to chemical B, and then chemical B maybe needs to be broken down, and maybe part of it needs to be changed to chemical C. Each of those changes is a transformation that's called a metabolic step. That's what metabolism is. Okay. And in humans, and I think most all mammals that I know of, all of those steps, all of them are based upon enzymatic activity, enzymes. So there you are with this pathway, and chemical A has to get converted to chemical B. And you have the enzymes and you have the chemicals in you, but if you don't have the cofactors, the enzymes are sluggish. And we have, that's my term, it's not a biological term. We have sluggish pathways, okay? That's what we should diagnose mental disorders sometimes is sluggish pathways.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but it is recognized. I mean, that's why people are given things like SSRIs to enable them to have more serotonin
That's
because
right.
they need that boost. Well, you can do it with nutrients. And here's the reason why. So you've got chemical A and you've got the enzyme to convert chemical A to chemical B, and you want to have lots of cofactors, but you're smart, so you've eaten lots of nutritious foods and whole foods, and so you've got the whole complement of 30 plus micronutrients coursing through your bloodstream. That enzyme can grab the micronutrients it needs and hustle on down to chemical B because it's got what it needs to move quickly and efficiently. That is what we need for optimal brain function. Other things too, but it's really key. If people understood that, they would, I think, eat better. And it all begins with that word cofactor. Eat your cofactors.
Eat your cofactor. There's
That's
your
right.
slogan.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, just understanding that for this process to take place, I need all these micronutrients. And if I don't have them, that process is going to be very sluggish. I mean, I can feel that. So I can understand that. And sluggish, you said it's not scientific exactly, but it's a word that we can relate to. And what we're hoping from this conversation and ones like it is that people make change because of that understanding. And for me, I always think of that embodied, really, I get it, not just up in my mind, but I get it. I'm feeling how these changes can change my life.
Right. I want to throw in a complication here that relates to your audience is listening to people who have very different experiences when eating food. So I just want you to know that we cannot test for how I'm going to make these numbers up. We cannot test for how much magnesium you need for a transformational step, a metabolic step. We cannot measure how much I need of that same magnesium for the same step. There's no way to get inside the brain right now to figure that out. All we can do is look at peripheral blood for what's circulating out there, and that doesn't tell what we need.
Mm,
But we know from tons of other genetic research in physical health that what you need is probably different from what I need. Okay.
okay.
And that we have inherited different needs. Maybe you need more magnesium, but I need more vitamin B6.
Mm,
Perfectly possible. And so they all work together. Um, so this is a good reason for not paying any attention to research on single nutrients.
oh, yeah.
There is no magic bullet. And I still have friends say, Bonnie, which is the important vitamin for, it doesn't work that way. You have to be getting them all. And you also
Yes.
have to be getting other things that we're not going into. But being able to study the micronutrients in pill form, we get accused of wanting to promote products, but neither one of us has ever been affiliated with any company, still true. But the reality is that I'm not going to make a product, right? And it makes no sense to be gluing nutrients together. We wanted to study a way to look at all 30 some micronutrients prepared in balance in the way in which they interact for us.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
you make that point in the book, which that is a really strong point. If for anyone who reads the book, is like you can't just. There's no magic bullet. We just want to take B. We hear every once in a while there's a news cycle and one vitamin becomes popular, and your message is really about having a really wide diversity of nutrients and vitamins um, and that there's no one and so you talk about a little bit in your book, like, where to go in the grocery store, which I think is great, and trying out different vegetables. I was telling my husband that last night or the night before,
Yeah.
you know, trying out something, just learn one, like how you can throw this one in. But you also talk about that, unfortunately, the soil is depleted out of a lot of those nutrients that normally we would think would go to the vegetables that we would be eating. Do you want to share just a little bit about that? Because I'm one of those people who was converted, like, I know we have to eat well, colorful plate, mostly vegetables. I'm personally a pescatarian, so I eat tons of vegetables. I eat a lot of beans, and um, but it took me a while to admit that, or think it wasn't cheating to take outside reinforcements. But
Oh,
now I'm
certainly.
converted.
Yeah.
I'm
Oh, yeah.
like, why can't we just get it from our
Mm.
food? Like, that's the earth. That's what's natural, right?
No, it's
Um,
not natural anymore.
it's not. Can you explain a
Mm.
little bit about why we need extra supplementation in addition, even if you're eating a healthy diet?
Well, I don't want to be in a position of saying everybody needs to take supplementation. And it's, we really need to teach people that we can do so much by getting people to make better choices first. So that's the important thing.
Okay.
So if I say to you that the latest research showed that, I don't know, zinc is unusually low in our wheat fields or something, I'm just making that up, okay? That doesn't mean you should go out and buy zinc supplements. It means that you should eat more of other vegetables and fruits and grains, etc. You need to stop eating the junk and really turn your diet into something healthful. But there is a lot of concern. There's also a movement to try to change things, the regenerative agriculture movement.
Yeah.
These are people who are really working to change things, but they have a lot to change. I mean, get rid of the artificial things like glyphosate, which is binding up some of the minerals so that the plants can't use them. They can't utilize them to synthesize the vitamins we need. So they sterilize the soil, which gets rid of a lot of the microorganisms that the plants need. Um, there's also just inevitably just reusing the land all the time and losing the concept of crop rotation and cover crops to keep in the nutrients from the end of the previous season. So, all of that the regenerative ag people are working on. But there's also global warming. Increased carbon dioxide in the air does a funny thing, and this has been shown in controlled studies. Actually, the one that I saw was in rice, that if you put a source of carbon dioxide in the center of a field and you grow your crop in concentric circles around it, the ones that are getting the most carbon dioxide go down in their nutrient density, but they might grow bigger because plants love carbon dioxide. They absorb it, they grow faster. But as one of my colleagues said, but you're just eating sugar bombs, right? They are higher in carbs and lower in the micronutrients. So, you know, regenerative agriculture followers can do a lot, but they can't solve everything. We all have to be working on global warming.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. As a first step, just looking at our diet, and not everyone certainly can afford supplements.
Right.
So, the first steps that we can make are, in our own grocery store. Um,
Are
can you?
you ready for a few numbers along that line before I sense you're about to change
Oh,
the
yeah.
topic. You
Yeah,
want me to?
yeah, yeah. Give us a few
If you
numbers.
decide it's too much, you can delete it later. So the latest research, and I have both Canadian and American, but the latest is American, so I'll quote it. It's totally consistent that if you look at what people are choosing to consume, more than 50% of the caloric value of our society, more than 50%, comes from ultra processed chemical rubbish.
Yeah.
So we have a long way to go in terms of making better choices. And in children, the choices we're making for them, and this is what's called NHANES data, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey that's been going on since 1971 in the US. what that showed is that 67% of the caloric intake of our children under the age of 19 is from ultra processed rubbish. So again, we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
But I'd like to take make a point that's a little more constructive, and that is how to think about the levels of processing. Could I do that for a
Oh,
moment?
please, please.
Okay, so we all know, and you and I have been referring to food which is whole foods, Mediterranean style. You pick up an apple and you eat it, and we should do that once a day, by the way. That is a whole, unprocessed food. And you pick up a bag of junk, and that is at the extreme, the ultra processed. I don't like to call it ultra processed food. The reason is it's not food. It's not making your cells grow, and it's not feeding them or maintaining them. It's not food. It's ultra processed rubbish. But in between, there's a category, and researchers usually have 4 levels, but I'm not going to bother with that. In between, there's a category that people could take advantage of, save money, and really improve their nutrition. It's kind of minimally processed. So I'll give you some examples. Most of the frozen foods, for example, when you buy a bag of frozen peas, technically that has been processed, but usually it has been frozen right at harvest. And it may well, if it's been delivered properly, it may well have better nutritional profile than the peas that are over in the produce section that have been sitting out for a few days. So frozen vegetables can be very, very healthy for you. Also, a lot of canned beans and legumes, as you know, excuse me, are minimally processed. And unfortunately, they often add sodium. So, what people don't know, and we teach this in our book, is if you want to make sure you're not loading up on sodium, and we should all be careful of that, just open the can of black beans, put it in a colander, and rinse them,
That's
and you're
right.
rinsing off almost all the sodium. And you're getting, it's a minimally processed food. It's so inexpensive, as you know. And if you want to make, we have a chapter on recipes in our book. I'm always supposed to remind people of that, but it makes me chuckle because one day I thought, why is it bothering me that we're, telling people, oh, look at our book because we have these excellent recipes. They are very good, but I put in the word lentil. I think it was lentil recipe, lentils and spinach. I think I put in to a search on Google. And in less than 1 second, I had 9 million recipes. So don't buy our book for the recipes. Okay. Looking for really good and cheap ways to eat, and you will save on your food.
Yes. Oh my gosh, we save a lot from frozen food, and it's very helpful with kids. And I think a lot of people are challenged with time these days. Both parents, multiple parents working,
Yep.
and the
Yep.
schedules. And I wonder, and this, if you don't have any ideas here, I'm throwing this out a little bit of left field, but I also hear from a lot of parents that their kids are very picky eaters.
Yeah.
And I think at a point they give up, or they don't want to fight them anymore. I don't know if you have any advice for if you've
Yeah.
seen anything with that, or yeah.
It's clearly from the research, it's a matter of habituation,
Yeah.
number of presentations.
Yes.
But the problem is with many people who have, especially really dramatic children or autistic children, or, you know, they don't like having the kid at the dinner table going, "Warf," and getting all
Yeah.
worked up about it. It becomes very emotional. So there's one little thing in our book that I think is worth exploring, and that's the thank you bite. And I think if you look in the index under picky eater, it takes you to a little box of the thank you bite, which helps promote. I can describe it to you if you want. Helps promote number of presentations for a child and takes a lot of the stress out of the dinner table. So, do you
Yeah.
want me to go into that, or just tell them to go get the book?
Go get the book. But I want to underline, highlight. I don't remember the number now, but I remember I reading at some point that it's something like 15 presentations. So if you're giving up at 7, I tried. You need to go 7 more, something like that.
Yeah,
Um,
it has to, you have to
it's
be
high.
very calmly persistent.
Yeah.
And the thank you bite is based on the idea of requiring a bite
Yeah.
and not swallowing it. Just,
Okay.
engaging the taste buds, getting used to the flavor and the texture. Maturity helps too, watching them age. I have a child on the spectrum and who now eats his broccoli before anything else when he comes over and sees we have broccoli. That
Yeah,
wasn't the
I
way
mean, I
it was
wanted
for
to bring
me.
that in because this is especially relevant with kids who are neurodivergent, and some of the so the reason I wanted to bring that in with the picky eating is because some of the things I want to talk about as far as like kids who might be overly anxious, kids who maybe are neurodivergent or ADHD, or could be helped specifically by having more micronutrients and are rejecting the micronutrients
Yeah,
because they have sensitivities to texture, to taste, and this and that. So there's a bridge there because I want to hear some of your stories about how helping improve the nutrients have maybe some cases where you've seen a real difference. Because I was amazed by some of the stories that you tell in the
yeah,
book.
they were all true. We changed the names, but they were all true. There are some amazing stories we've encountered.
Psychosis, even. I mean,
Like,
people would not
like
expect
what?
that. Psychosis that,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but one of the first cases I ever was involved in collecting data on was a woman with chronic schizophrenia, and managed to convince a newly trained, that's relevant here, newly trained psychiatrist to evaluate this woman when we had the opportunity to do what's called an ABA reversal. So on supplements, off supplements, on, off. And in a nutshell, what happened was she became completely normal on the on a broad spectrum formula that was developed here in Alberta, and then she and her husband went away, and she ran out of it. And so when she came back, she was again bedridden and completely psychosis, seeing spiders on the wall and all of the hallucinations and so forth. And the psychiatrist agreed to evaluate her then. And then after we put her back on a broad spectrum micronutrient formula. And the psychiatrist was blown away. And so I said, well, let's write it up as a case report. And she didn't. She refused because she was too junior, and she felt it would taint her career. Is that crazy? Where's the psychosis here? I mean, it just, I could never even look her in the eye again because I can't imagine being lacking the courage to write up something that you knew was true, for which
Yeah.
we had the data
Yeah.
and the background, but she felt it would ruin her career.
Which just says so much about the
Psychiatry.
yes. um,
Yeah, not all
yeah.
psychiatrists, but as a
No,
field.
no,
I
the
mean,
field and of course the
yeah,
the pharmaceutical field as well and their
yeah,
influence.
that's
Yeah.
right. However, last week, the American Psychiatric Association's newsletter called, must be called Psychiatric News, something ordinary like that, had an article on, let's see, I could read you the title if I just change screens here, I think. Um, no, I'm not going to find it. Maybe I closed it. Sorry. At any rate, it was basically something like psychiatry needs to start considering nutrition.
Yeah.
Really kind of blew us away.
Needs to start.
Yeah. Well, they're behind the times, but they're pulling up their socks.
Okay.
Yeah,
We'll take any steps in the right direction.
that's right.
Can you
That's
share, you have some stories about natural disasters. You're probably aware we're, coming off this big fires in LA and a lot of people suffering. And as we spoke about earlier with with climate change and happening, it's going to be more and more likely that we see disasters like this. You've had
Yeah.
an impact on survivors of disasters.
Yeah, this one is much more than stories. This one includes randomized controlled trials, and it also
Amazing.
includes, yeah. So I'll just give a little overview of it, and then if anyone really wants to know about it, I can send one of the peer-reviewed articles. There are several peer-reviewed articles on it. So
Yes.
this all began because Julia Ruckledge, my co-author and former student, was in Christchurch, New Zealand, and the year was 2010. And you may remember a massive earthquake struck Christchurch in September of 2010. And she was in the middle of doing clinical studies of one of the broad spectrum formulas that was developed here in Alberta, of which there are two now that are very similar. They're kind of spin offs of each other. So um, she finished the studies and noted that observationally that the people who she had data on pre-earthquake and who were taking the micronutrients at the time of the earthquake fared much better than those who had not yet been introduced to the micronutrients. So she thought, well, that was interesting, and she hoped to follow it up someday. But little did she know she would have the opportunity very quickly, because for 5 months from September till February, they had something like, I've forgotten the number now, 6,000 aftershocks, small earthquakes. I mean, it was a terribly scary place to live, very traumatized population. But then in February, at the end of the 5 months, they had a massive earthquake that destroyed a third of the downtown. Imagine where you're living. If a third of the downtown were destroyed and a couple of hundred people died, and she stepped in and did a randomized controlled trial because her preliminary data from the 5 months was so strong, she was able to get ethics approval, and people were randomized to get either treatment as usual, which is basically psychiatric meds if they were suffering a great deal after that, or micronutrients. And what I can't show slides in this, but we do have many pictures that show that the group that got the micronutrients in 4 to 6 weeks were in the normal range, down in the normal range for depression, anxiety, and stress. Those who had treatment as usual were not. So that was very strong. Then, that was 2011. 2000, I think 13, we had a massive flood where I live, Calgary, Alberta. And she called me and said, tell the mayor they have to hand out micronutrients. Well, we both knew that wasn't going to happen. So we thought at least maybe we could do a study and then we'd have some local Alberta data. So that's what happened. We got ethics approval to do a study of people who, after the flood, were really depressed, really stressed out, etc. And they were randomized to get either a broad spectrum micronutrient formula or vitamin D. Now, vitamin D has been shown to help a little bit with depression. So it's what you might call an active placebo. There was genuine hope that it would help people some, and we didn't know what would happen with the micronutrients because she had done it in the earthquakes. They had been suffering for 5 months. We had a single day. But if you look at the graph, the line is exactly parallel. The people who got the micronutrients after the flood in 4 to 6 weeks were down in the normal range. Those who got vitamin D were not. Then, I'm almost done.
No, this is
Then
just
Yeah, this was not
incredible.
the area we were interested in. We
Yeah.
got pulled in by where we lived. But then they had the mosque massacres, the mass shootings in two mosques in Christchurch. And one of Julia's postdocs was a Muslim from that community. And he knew that the people who survived that horrific day were really traumatized. I mean, and in fact, many of them met criteria for PTSD in the short term. But nobody could imagine doing a placebo controlled trial. How could you? There's a point at which it's immoral. And so what they did was a clinical observational thing so that everybody was given free supplements for a few weeks, actually a few months, sorry. And when you plot their results next to the flood and the earthquakes, it's the same trajectory, 4 to 6 weeks, and they were in the normal range for depression. And the reason you can look across all these studies is we use the same measure, the DAS scale, which is a depression, anxiety, and stress scale. Same result. So then along came massive forest fires in northern Alberta. I don't know how to compare them to the forest fires in LA. I haven't looked at the numbers or anything. It doesn't matter. You've got, we had 90,000 people displaced, unable to cook on their own stoves or anything. And so I went to the politicians, I went to the psychiatrists in our healthcare system, and they went to the dietitians, and no one would let me educate people about taking micronutrients, hand out micronutrients. They wouldn't even let me hand out B complex, which in normal situations can improve resilience. No, they weren't interested. So then the government published their own data of mood and anxiety disorders on the web. And I have a slide of it showing what happened after the Fort McMurray forest fires. And guess what? The anxiety and depression went up, up, up.
Yeah.
And we could have helped people. We weren't allowed to. So, LA, sure. Tell me how I could influence people.
Well, I mean, you have. I think you've made a very strong case in, our time together here, and, folks can get the book, and maybe we can link some of these studies to the show notes here. There are more studies that you reference in the book, more of people's personal stories. Kids that were diagnosed with oppositional ODD,
Yeah.
other stories like that. I think one thing left to define is broad spectrum.
Oh,
Um,
sure.
and so let's let people know what that is, and how do they know where to get one? Is it a good one? If they feel like, I want to try this out.
Sure. Um, the websites I think are on my website. Can we put my website in your show
Oh,
notes?
we definitely will.
So the two formulas that are the most studied in the world, and we researchers use them almost interchangeably. What happened was they started as one company called True Hope, and their website is truehope.com. And then, business partners, it's like marriages, they don't
Yeah.
last forever. And after 15 years, there was a parting of the ways between the two families who started that. And so the Hardy family split off. The Stephan family stayed with True Hope. Hardy family formed Hardy Nutritionals, and their website is hardynutritionals.com. And they're very similar formulas, and they have different um, formulations. They both have the nutrients in capsules. They both have it in powders you can put in drinks, but um, that's kind of hard to do. Have a recommended drink 3 times a day, so it's easier to take pills. And then True Hope has come up with a really interesting formula that Julia has studied now in a couple of studies showing that it's just as efficacious, we think, although it wasn't a head to head comparison with the capsules. And that's with one that is kind of like the pixie stick candy
Huh.
powder,
Yeah.
but you put it under your tongue and hold it in your mouth, and it's absorbed sublingually, as some medications are.
Oh,
That's very good for young children. So,
yes.
anyway, but you have to learn how to use these things. You have to contact the companies, and I've given you the websites to find out what they recommend if you're on medications. Because if you're on
Mhm.
psychiatric medications, you need guidance as to how to introduce micronutrients.
Yes.
Because if the micronutrients are effective, then what used to be an appropriate dose becomes an overdose of the medication, right?
Yeah.
You can take ineffective over the counter stuff all the time and you won't feel anything. So,
Yeah.
anyway, so otherwise, chapter 11 of our book evaluates all the world literature for broad spectrum formulas, and we usually require they have at least 24 or 25 of the micronutrients to call them broad spectrum.
Great.
But aside from the two Alberta formulas, there's only one peer reviewed study on another formula out there in North America. There are some European formulas that we don't have access to.
Huh.
And that's just one last summer, and it was in seniors with mild cognitive impairment. So I hope to see more. I mean, we all want there to be more
Yes.
multi-ingredient formulas that have a database, have an evidence base.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, most of the companies don't want their formulas studied.
So that's where Bonnie and I got cut off. But we were about to close the conversation. I just want to remind you to take a look at Bonnie's site. It's bonniejkaplan.com. And from that site, you can get more information about micronutrients and broad spectrum products that have been tested, and you can get more information about her work and her book. Bonnie, we are so thrilled to have you on the Beyond Trauma podcast and appreciate the work you're doing in this field. Thanks, everyone.